Good morning and welcome to the third and final day of the Kansas Legal Revitalization Conference. We are having speakers introduce themselves, but I couldn't resist an opportunity to thank all of you for being here with us this morning and to pay particular attention and to give particular thanks to all of the people who have contributed to making this conference very, very special for all of us. And that includes not only the lawyers and judges who are in the planning committee, but most of all the people who are sitting at the tables out here, the people who are back in the war room keeping things going. A lot of you have probably had some contact at one time or another with Carla Brogdon, who has made virtually all the travel arrangements and hotel arrangements for all of our presenters. It's an extraordinary group of people, and if you would join me in recognizing them and giving them a hand, Our panel this morning is as amazing a group of lawyers, judges, former judges turned law professors as you will ever assemble at one time. And I'm just going to give you their names and what they're doing and let them take it from there. Seated to my far left, your right, is Professor Nancy Gertner of Harvard Law School. Nancy is a retired U.S. District Judge as well. Judge Martha Vasquez from the District of New Mexico, former Chief Judge, just an extraordinary talent. She and Judge Gertner have written extensively. I'm sure all of you are here, if you're interested in sentencing, have read their opinions. And it is just delightful and a wonderful opportunity for us to have both of you here. Thank you so much. Seated directly to my right and your left is Judge Patrick Michael Duffy, P. Michael Duffy, Mike as most of us know him, who was a baby judge classmate of mine back in Richmond, Virginia in February of 1996. And Judge Duffy immediately became their spiritual leader and has become a dear, dear, longtime friend. The only thing I will tell you about him is that 4 or 5 of our classmates and I and our spouses visited Mike in Charleston a couple of years after we went through baby judges school. Mike arranged a walking tour of Charleston for us in July. It became known as the Bataan Death March. And then finally on the end, A.J. Kramer, who has become a friend over the past couple of years. We sit together on the Rules of Evidence Advisory Committee. A.J. is the federal defender in the District of Columbia. I think a lot of you have known A.J. over the years, and he certainly has spoken. We stopped by the Kansas City Metropolitan Bar Association gathering last evening for a few minutes, and he ran into a fella that he had been in a program with out in Wyoming about 20 years ago. And he still recognized A.J., and what's more impressive is that A.J. remembered him. So you've got 4 extraordinary folks up here, and I can't tell you how much I'm looking forward to the program.
Can I say something while you're still there?
Sure.
I just want to say it's really a privilege and an honor to be here at what I would call the Friends of Tom Martin gathering. And have you ever seen somebody with so many friends? But he recognized the staff who have just done an incredible job. But I think while he's up here on the stage, we should recognize him for what he's done.
A.J., you're too kind. Thank you all, and the floor is yours.
I guess with that, I'm up. Can you see Tom and I as 2 Gerber babies in judge school? I got to tell you, he set a very high standard. If you saw his part on the program with his friend Don Schlitz, and Tom would lecture with a few pearls, and then Don would interpret on the guitar, we felt like y'all be expecting some entertainment, and we don't have any instruments, but we asked that somebody step up, and so we have one of our panel who's agreed to sing without accompaniment. In South Carolina, we sing Acapulco. And so I'm gonna let him start us off. Hit it, AJ.
I've always wanted to sing like on American Idol, so I think for the sake of all of you, I will pass up this opportunity.
All right. Well, as you heard, I'm from the Holy City. It's known for that because we were founded on religious freedom, and for the longest time, our skyline was church steeples. All that's changed because we've been discovered. But I do think it was misleading from the very beginning because there's a reported case in South Carolina, State versus Shatterassy, 1914, in which Judge Memminger took judicial notice of the fact that the Charleston people are a lawless people. So we've managed to overcome that. We're now the #1 tourist attraction in the United States, so y'all come see us, okay? Now, our topic today, it was assigned to us by himself, Tom Martin, is sentencing reform. I like to speak about the end of that program because reform to me should start with alternatives and options for judges at sentencing. And I came up at a time when I practiced law, did criminal defense work. There were no mandatory minimums to speak of, and there were no mandatory guidelines. I came on the bench, I was faced with all of that, and I didn't like it. And I found every way I could. I'm being blunt, I'm being recorded, you can send it where you want. I tried to get around it every way I could, and I was generally successful in that. But I've got good news for you now. The guidelines are not mandatory. We've got some options. And I want to talk to you about some that I think are exciting. We in Charleston like to think we're an incubator for programs to come along and make a difference in these people's lives. I'm going to speak to you mostly about one of the programs, Turning Leaf. You have some brochures on your table describing it. And if we had time, I'll talk a little bit about our drug court. You've heard about reentry programs. Some have had mixed results, et cetera. This one's outstanding. We've got a drug court. This takes care, by the way, the tough, hard to deal with folks, not low-hanging fruit. And we've got a bridge program that's our drug court that takes care of the rest. And they've both been successful. I'm going to show you about a 5-minute video on the Turning Leaf program. MSNBC did it. But I want to tell you a little bit about the lady that started it and why I think it's so successful. Young lady's name is Amy Barch. And she came to Charleston, I guess in about 2010, had a full-time job and would volunteer in the prisons part-time in the jails. Well, she was so passionate about that, she quit her job, and she worked nights and weekends waiting tables and worked in the daytime in the jails. And I tell everybody she's the Mother Teresa of our program. Well, she got to be so successful. This was an in-jail training program, cognitive behavioral readjustment and responsibility, the keys of the program, teaching these folks how to do it otherwise. And the other key to the program is bringing them in touch with the victims. And you will see from this video I'm about to show you in the jail that this graduation program from Turning Leaf is run by the inmates in the cells. And I think you'll get an idea of what it's about, and then I'll comment on it afterwards. I'm not a techie. I hope this works.
Amy Barch has created a program called Turning Leaf. It's geared toward offenders who will soon be released in hopes that they won't return, or at least not escalate their criminal activity.
The idea behind this class is that our thinking controls our behavior, and if we can get a good grasp on our thinking patterns, then we can have different outcomes.
Sometimes roles are reversed, and inmates play officers.
Officer Hayward, I'm really sorry for cursing at you. I know that wasn't the right thing to do, and I'm really just having a bad day. Will you accept my apology?
I'm really shocked at your behavior. I really am, but I can understand you having a bad day. So let's go ahead and get back to your schedule, and let's make sure this doesn't happen.
It won't happen again, thanks.
Leonard Hayward is charged with grand larceny, to which he has pled not guilty and is awaiting trial.
What bothers me the most is that, I let my daughter down.
Hayward could go home to his daughter now, but has chosen to wait.
In all honesty, I could have bonded out a month and a half ago, but no. I signed up to the class for a reason, something inside, my spirit was telling me, go to the class, continue in the class until I graduate from that class.
The program is based on the concept of restorative justice.
Restorative justice is an approach that says it's so important to bring together the people that are committing the crimes and any people that are harmed by the crimes, for all of us to get together and try to see one another as people and build compassion and understanding, and that's where real change happens.
When we choose violence as a way to respond to problems, we have to stand responsible for what happens, even if that intent is never there.
8 years earlier, Ryan Carey was one of 12 victims in a murder and robbery spree carried out by 2 men in Virginia.
Walking across the street, and a car stopped at the stop sign, and the passenger got out and came up to me asking for directions. As soon as he got up to me, he hit me. And I kind of, stepped back, reached for my wallet, gave him my wallet, and then the driver of the car got out and threw me on the ground and started stabbing me. I got my throat slit, I got my lung punctured, I got stabbed 40 times. I passed out on the rug and got all the way into the emergency room and my heart stopped. I had, I think, 25 surgeries in the span of 2 years. I couldn't do anything by myself. And I felt useless. I felt like my manhood was gone. I couldn't have any kind of relationships with women. I couldn't have really any relationships with anybody. I was a mess.
Your story just, it transforms my mind, because it makes me think a lot further, even a person who, like me, who had property crimes, it could always escalate into something else.
Consistently, what they will tell me is the thing that impacted me the most was hearing from the victims. And they think, wow, Ryan went through all of that trauma at no fault of his own, and he's been able to continue on. He hasn't turned to a life of crime. And I think that that provides them with an ability to reflect on their own life and think about what's possible for them.
My name is Leonard Hayward, and I welcome you to the graduation ceremony of the Turning Leaf Project. Today, you will witness a variety of speeches, testimonials, skits, and poems. And it's our hope that we effectively convey our positive changes and ambitions to you.
My thoughts control my actions, and if I think better, I'll act better. And now that I know better, I'll do better.
I'm 25 years old, been in jail 19 times. Had no family, so why I gotta think about somebody else? Had nobody to care for me, so why I gotta care about anybody else? That's how I felt. Ms. Amy changed my way of thinking.
I've turned into a liar, a cheat, a thief. Like a great man said, Henry Ford, don't find fault, find a remedy. And that's what this class has done for me. It's a remedy.
I'm so proud of you guys. You all know that. Ridiculously proud of you guys.
Let's hold up these diplomas right about here. Loser, lowlife, criminal, failure, felon. These are the titles by which we are described. We're living and breathing examples of what this class can positively manifest. You, I, we are part of the community. And the only way we're going to truly solve the problems that we all face, we're going to have to set aside these negative titles and not be forever caged by our mistakes of the past. So we, the graduates of the Turning Leaf Project, humbly thank you for providing us with an opportunity for self-improvement.
That was how the program began. this woman came to work, no money for anything, but those certificates they held up, she had printed early on, and she understood the significance of that, because to these people and others in their family, they'd never completed anything. And that certificate, you could see from what they just did, meant everything to them. Well, she's taken it from there, and we were so impressed. The first interaction I had with her, I was taking a plea from a fella, 41 years old, facing a 15-year sentence, and he said to me at the plea, not at sentencing, "Judge, there's a program going on in the jail, and it's full, and I don't know if I can get into it, but I'd like to. It's called Turning Leaf. And everybody there that's been into it says it's absolutely wonderful, and I know that I need it more than anyone else." I said, what the heck, you know? So I ordered them to put him in the program. I get a call from Amy Bart. She said, "Judge, you've ordered this man to be to be a part of Turning Leaf." She says, "That's just me. How can you sentence somebody to me?" I said, "Well, Amy, I didn't know that." Well, she said, the second thing is I want it to be voluntary, because if it's not, they won't do well. So I said, okay, tell him he's admitted, and we'll see what we can do to help you. Fast forward. She now has a board of directors. I've taken her to meet the mayor of Charleston, North Charleston, and Mount Pleasant. I let her pitch to them, and I just sit back and watch. They're all on board. The important thing that they're doing right now is providing jobs for these people when they get out. If you read this brochure, you'll see now that they have a reentry program that's 8 weeks outside the jail. And the pre-release center leased them a building for $1 a year. And that's where they do this. They hold classes for that period of time, 15 hours a week. They do case management. They have job placement. And the fellow that's the job place and supervisor goes every week to the job site and counsel. They're doing all this stuff. We have businessmen in the community are now on that board. The chief of police, Mullen in Charleston, who's a tremendous police chief, has got funding from the city of Charleston. One of the men in that film was a state senator. He got a grant from the state of South Carolina. She now has a budget, she has resources, and right now they have 15 slots for these jobs, and they're increasing. The city of North Charleston's adding jobs, and now they're transitioning into permanent jobs, and they're learning to be responsible citizens, and we're saving money. These guys are not spending $30,000 a year taxpayer money in jail. And the fellow that I told you about that I sentenced to her program, if you look on the back of this brochure, the guy with the paintbrush, that's him. He's now employed by Santee Cooper Electric, and he's their star employee. And they use him as an example to everyone. So I know you've heard mixed results about reentry programs. This thing works, and it's working, every day, and it's evidence-based. We got all the stats to prove it, and I'll just give you a quick summary of what the results are. 126 men have graduated from the jail-based classes now, not counting the transition outside into the reentry program that I just described. 65 have been released, and only 26% recidivism. That rate's less than half of the national average from 30 states. So this thing's working. We're not only saving money, we're saving lives. And these people are going back to their families and doing well and saving the taxpayers money. They've estimated since 2014 that they've saved the taxpayers at least $300,000 on prison cost alone, not counting family things such as the support needed for that. Let me just read to you quickly what two people said about the program. This is the Charleston County Public Defender. "Turning a Leaf is making a difference in the lives of my clients. I've noticed changes in their behavior. They no longer claim to be the victims of their upbringing. Men who had prior serious offenses have cried during meetings when we discuss their cases. Client said they understood what they did and the effects it had on others. It gives them hope. They begin to speak of possibilities beyond the bars of jail and prison. These men have become motivated. We're fortunate that Amy Barr chose Charleston to offer her services here. And I'll close with reading by what Chief Mullins said about the Chief of Police in Charleston. The offender reentry services are a critical part of keeping our community safe. We can keep sending people back to jail and prison, but eventually they get out. Without a real intervention, I see most go back into the same neighborhoods, friends, and criminal activity. Currently, there's no focused effort in the Charleston area that seeks to change an offender's behavior and mindset with proven models integrating custody and post-release intervention. Turning Leaf fills that gap in those services. Not only does this project make our neighborhood safer, but it saves us money and helps these men transform their lives. So when you hear all these negative things about reentry programs, understand, if it's set up correctly, if it gets proper support, it works beautifully. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
My name is Martha Vasquez. I sit in Santa Fe, and I'm from a district that has, it's a border district, and it has 19 Indian pueblos and tribes. So we have many cases from Indian country. Because it's a border district, we also have many immigration cases. And we have many drug cases, and so primarily my district handles many criminal cases, which is how I got to know Judge Martin, who kindly comes and helps us with our high criminal caseload. I have to thank all of you. This seminar for me has been truly invigorating. I have not had the time and ability to participate in many of the wonderful programming that the Federal Judicial Center and the AO provides. So for me, this has been an incredible opportunity to stop and think and get away from my district. Think about my riding, Judge Martin. Think about all of the thought-provoking seminars that I have attended this last couple days. Think about the way I look at the people that come before me. And take a break and think about what I do. It has really, for me, been an incredible experience. A year ago, when Judge Martin asked me to participate, getting away has always been very difficult because of my work and my family obligations. But really, the gift it has been for me. And I want to thank all of you because this has been truly an incredible and thought-provoking experience for me. So thank you, Judge Martin. Sentencing is something that's very dear to my heart. All of us on the bench regard it as one of the most difficult, painful, draining things that we do. But as I've been away from it these last couple days and trying to figure out what to say to you, I think that I'd like to share something that hopefully will be something that we can all gain from. And that is that sentencing should never be a one-day relationship with our defendants. And many times, because of our heavy, crushing caseload, it's very tempting for it to be just that. Many times we have no trials, many times we have no suppression hearings, so many times the only time a judge sees a defendant is that one sentencing date. I urge you to change the paradigm here and to consider that it is a relationship that lasts as long as our defendant is in the legal system. And that is that the judge think of it as the decision that is made that day that the judge faces that defendant becomes a decision that the judge bears responsibility for as long as the defendant stays within our legal system and until the last day that the defendant gets released from all supervision. And that way, the judge has a vested interest in the decision that that judge made that day. And I think this carries over with what Judge Duffy said. And I think that carries over into a judge that is much more engaged in the entire legal process. And with that, I'd like to follow with some other ideas that I have about how you do just that. And I want to stay within my time because all of my colleagues have some wonderful ideas to impart with you as well. We are now seeing many offenders leaving prison, and districts are scrambling for what to do and how to take care of them. The reentry program that Judge Duffy talked about is inspiring. Every district has a responsibility for coming up with a way to deal with people who have spent too many years in prison. Some of them I sent away 20 years ago when I was first on the bench due to mandatory minimums. I am seeing them come out now. They are afraid of crowds. They don't know anything about iPhones. They go to the grocery store and they've not seen how you scan products. Their cities don't look the same anymore because landmarks are gone. We have an obligation. We, the judges that sent them away 20-some years ago because of mandatory minimums, we have an obligation to help them reenter. Their families have disintegrated. So how do we do this? If we are going to help them with supervised release, we have to make sure that we are able to help them. There are many things that can be done, and the judge is obligated to make sure that they are successful. Every district should have an employment program. It is not difficult to do, and you as a judge have tremendous influence in initiating employment programs. We started one in New Mexico many years ago. And what you do is you invite employers from the entire state, from your district, and you invite them to hire your offenders. And you do it by honestly telling them who they are. Because there is nothing worse than coming out of prison branded a felon. Housing costs so much more for a felon. You must be aware that especially if you're a sex offender, but any kind of felon pays a lot more for housing. They've already done their time, but they are still facing the effects of a felony for the rest of their lives. So we invite employers, we have breakfast. All of us as judges speak and we say, hire our defendants. Probation will supervise them. Probation will make sure that they don't show up drunk. Probation shows up at their home and makes sure that they're doing well. Who else does that for you? You hire other people off the street and you don't know what you're getting. If you hire one of our folks, they will be clean, eager to work, eager to support their family. And we have employers from all over the state. They also get a tax break too. You have reentry programs. Now sometimes we have heard that the reentry programs haven't been successful, but reentry programs do a lot more than simply, and they shouldn't be measured just by whether people violate the conditions of their supervision or get arrested. Reentry programs help people learn how to interview for a job. How do you answer a question of why is your resume blank for the last 20 years? We help defendants be able to answer those questions. We provide clothes, so that they have something to wear for the interview. We provide housing. We provide Medicaid assistance, disability for many of our defendants that are no longer capable. We provide Social Security. Our probation officers are trained to help our defendants maneuver life right out of prison. a driver's license, an identification card, all of those things that are incapacitating to someone that has, for the last 20 years been told what time to get up and what time to turn off the lights and what time to eat. Our probation officers provide all of that. Medical care, all of the things that you must do when you get out of prison and you no longer have a family waiting for you. We provide all of that as part of a reentry program. Our officers are waiting for you when you are released from prison. But before, while you are still there, they receive all of the BOP records to see how is this person done, what kind of training has this person received. And they're ready for that person. The other things that we do is we have a judicial review program so that if a probation officer is having difficulty with someone on supervision, they refer it to a judge, to me in particular. And we meet with all of our criminal history category 6s, people with serious mental health issues, so that before they start getting violated, we meet on a regular basis every couple months without a robe in the courtroom with their families if they want to come in, and we talk about what's going on, how can we help. And some people say, I need more than once a week counseling. I need every day right now. So we do that. It's on the record. The lawyers come. But it's not an adversarial thing. It's what can we do, what's going on in your life. These are things that are proactive. These are things to get across the message. You're never going back into prison. What can we do to make sure that that happens? So we need to keep them employed. We need to find out what's going on in their lives. We do evaluations often. We train probation officers to look for mental health issues. If you get a defendant that's been in trouble since the time they were in school, something's wrong. We are trained, we have a special unit in our probation office of trained probation officers, specially trained in mental health issues. We are not psychiatrists or psychologists, but I'm tired of hearing that, especially from the government, hearing that everybody comes from poor environments, everybody comes from troubled neighborhoods. I'm tired of hearing that is precisely the case. Most of our defendants are poor. Most of our defendants have led lives that we can barely relate to. Our defendants have not had the benefit of good medical care like our children have. Most of our defendants have not had the benefit of school nurses that can identify if there is a mental health issue going on. Most of our defendants, for the first time, are diagnosed the serious mental health issue in court by us. And that is the first time they receive good mental health care. And if you are attuned to that, if your probation officers are trained to detect it, then finally you are able to change a life and protect the community. So we do a lot of evaluations, and we provide individuals with the medication that they need and the mental health counseling that they need. It's become too often in the United States that we see so much killing because people's mental health diagnosis was undetected and they are not treated. We have an obligation to be aware and to provide all of our offenders with the care that they need. Indian country is another world. And it is, I think, unforgivable and an incredible shame that we in the United States have people living without running water, without electricity. But we have a very high population in New Mexico of American citizens that live in this way. And how does that affect their legal rights? It affects them this way. When they commit a crime, and it is a serious crime for it to be in federal court, of course. Many times they can't be released because we can't supervise them. We can't use electronic monitoring if it's a rural community and there's no electricity. So many times it is their impoverished circumstances that requires that they be jailed. You know as lawyers and judges what that means. That means that they have to be in jail the entire time pre-trial, and their lawyers can't prepare the case effectively with them. It also deprives them of their ability to show the judge that they're remorseful. And it requires that the entire time, which can take, a year, 2 years, sometimes 3 years for them to prepare for trial, that they have no opportunity to address classification issues. They go straight from jail to prison. The other thing that it does is that when they are released from custody, many of them are sex offenders. They don't volunteer for the sex offender programs. You know why? It affects their safety while they're in prison. So they get out of prison without any sex offender training, or counseling rather. And all of the counseling has to come from the probation budget. And they still can't go home because home is very rural. And it's 3 hours or so for any of our probation officers to go and to visit them. So this population is without the assistance that it needs. Some of this population are Native American juveniles. Sometimes they are 10, 11, 12 years old. And they shouldn't be in custody at this age, but there's no other place to put them. So this is still an incredibly underserved population. And it is an incredibly difficult population to be able to provide services that they very much deserve. So, in closing, I would like us all to consider that the legal system, and we as judges in particular, have a tremendous effect in the lives of many of these individuals in our community. And I believe that we have an obligation to live through our decisions and live through their lives by being creative in the way that we can help. And I hope that some of the things that I've talked about are things that we might be able to improve upon and work together with, so that our legal system may continue to be a system that enhances the lives of people and isn't a system that simply destroys families for many, many years. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much. You've heard two wonderful talks, and I'll try not to repeat much. Needless to say, I agree with just about everything that's been said. I've been a federal public defender for 35 years now. I know, I started when I was 14. I was in California for 10 years, and now I've been in DC for 25 years. I can chalk up leaving California for DC to nothing other than stupidity on my part. And unlike Charleston, DC is not a lawless city, of course, depending on your viewpoint. I have to say, it's the one thing I've learned in 35 years of being a public defender is, and I think both Judge Duffy and Judge Vasquez touched upon it. If I came, the vast majority of my clients, if I came from the circumstances they did, I have no doubt I would be in the same position they're in. And many of them, nobody's ever treated them like a human being in their life. And one of the only people that does that is initially the public defender or the appointed counsel in the federal system in the vast majority of cases. And we think of ourselves as these great trial lawyers, and yet you all know the statistics for the federal system. 97.3% of the cases last year pleaded guilty. So what we really are is sentencing lawyers, and Judge Vasquez certainly touched upon that. To be a sentencing lawyer, you have to know your client. You can't it's not just running people through the mill. And I was thinking about that because when you have a client from out of town, we get a lot of clients that come to DC to do various things like jump over the White House fence or run into the Capitol with a gun. And so they're from out of town, and if they're released, they go back home. And the pre-sentence interview, if they plead guilty, is conducted by phone. And the probation officer writes the report. The probation officer has never even met the person. And yet they're presenting to the judge this report that and I'm not, believe me, I'm not criticizing them. I know how the system works. But they've never met this person, and they're producing a report that purports to show the person's life history and for the judge to base their sentencing upon. And to get the judge to know that even better is the job of the defense lawyer. Because that, if we don't do that job, too many judges nowadays are hooked onto the guidelines as even a reasonable situation, which they are not. Believe me, I come from before the guidelines regime when sentences were radically different. I'll just give you a little bit. You all know now that we have 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prison population. It's not that long ago, the federal prison population, believe it or not, was composed almost half of people convicted of theft offenses, primarily auto theft across state lines, and almost an equal number of people for drug offenses as there were for liquor offenses, and that was moonshine and beer smuggling. It's not that long ago that there were 17,000 people in the federal prison system. Now there's about 190, and that's only because it was 220,000 a few years ago and reduced by various initiatives having to do with drug, crime, and alternative programs. So it's been an amazing ride, and I noticed the Federal Bureau of Prisons budget is now 1/3 of the Department of Justice budget. You might ask yourself if that's out of whack with priorities that need to be focused on nowadays. The states, combined with the states, they spend $80 billion a year on corrections. I noticed in Judge Duffy's booklet, South Carolina alone spends $600 million a year on corrections, the state of South Carolina. So the system, everything everybody has talked about, alternative sentencing programs, veterans courts, reentry courts, drug courts, all of these are now starting to build up, and I recommend all of them highly. The jobs, education, we all know there's nothing that predicts recidivism more than if someone has a job when they get out of prison or some kind of training to get a job, or if they've participated in education programs in prison, and that the risk is almost half that the person will go back to prison if they have an education. Less than half go back to prison if they've had an education. And the programs, of course, the programs have been drastically cut, and private prisons have come in. Whether that will be followed through or not, the Attorney General, before she left office, ordered the private prisons, that BOP no longer contract with private prisons. And then, of course, there's the elephant in the room, the race. And you had a civil rights program yesterday that was fascinating. But I do want to tell you, 1 in 9 African-American children have a parent in prison. And that's quite a statement for our country to say that over 10% of African-American children have a parent in prison. So there's a lot of sentencing. One thing I want to focus on, there's a lot, and the clemency, President Obama's use of clemency was wonderful, not nearly enough as far as I'm concerned, way too much as far as other people were concerned. I had several clients actually who were sentenced for small amounts of crack, sentenced to 30 years in prison. A couple of them received clemency. One of them came into my office and said that he thought he would never see me again, probably because I'm so old he thought I'd be retired. But it's quite a moment when somebody who had no hope of getting out for 30 years or for life comes into your office, and the attitude of people like that are the most amazing thing of all to me. They come in with no bitterness, and matter of fact, they're just so happy that they were released, and I'm not so sure I would have the moral fiber or fortitude to be that way. They do, and it just amazes me the resilience of people like that, and if we just provided them the program. The last thing I really want to say is reentry programs are wonderful, but I'm afraid, And the clemency too bothered me in some sense. They emphasized that it was low-level nonviolent drug offenders, and that was the mantra. We were letting out all these low-level nonviolent drug offenders. And of course, they absolutely did. The sentences for them were outrageous, and they absolutely deserved to be let out early. But it's almost like, so we'll lock up, and there's all this emphasis on locking up the violent offenders and putting them away forever. And in the reentry court in D.C., there was a decision made that we would not take the low-level nonviolent drug offenders in the reentry court because they were not as much of a challenge. What we would focus on now in our reentry court is the people with violent offenses in their background, or bank robbers, people who committed violent offenses for the federal offense. And it was decided that we would take the resources and try on those folks first and try to see how that would work. It has been, the numbers are not that big, but what has happened so far has been quite successful because they've got the training. And I don't want to, we focus a lot, I know, on saying, and it's all true about drug sentences and low-level and nonviolent theft and offenses, but I don't want to lose fact of that we can't just lock away a whole, look, even I understand that there are some people who can't abide by the rules and just need to be separated, but that is a very, very small percentage of what is currently behind bars. And the problem is, I think we tend too much to say, well, we'll just lock these violent offenders up. And I don't want to lose sight of them as well. They are just as deserving of a chance because many of them, given the programs, we let out 600,000 people a year come out of state and federal prison and re-enter society. And we have to provide them an opportunity. As Judge Vasquez said, they're restricted from much housing. Well, if you don't have a place to live, how successful are you going to be when you get out? They're not eligible for financing of education. If you restrict their education, how successful are they going to be when we get out? We have to re-examine the whole thing unless we want to just lock. Those are human beings sitting in these prisons. And unless we want to lock away a whole generation, as we have locked away, if you read some of the books, as we have locked away a whole generation of young black males in this country, if we want to just keep doing that, it's not something that I think we should be proud of and something that I hope our society will correct in the near future. Thanks.
Uncharacteristically, I'm going to speak the least. They made me last on the program because there was a fear that I would otherwise talk the entire hour, which is a legitimate fear. There's no question about it. Although I have tried to recover from the notion that in Charleston we sing Acapulco. That's what I'm struggling. I left the bench in 2011 in part because I wanted to write and speak about the bigger picture. As a judge, you can deal with individuals in the way that Judge Duffy and Judge Vasquez have amazingly done. But I wanted to talk about the bigger picture. So I teach 2 courses at Harvard Law School. I teach one in mass incarceration with a sociologist and a policy specialist in juvenile justice from the Kennedy School. And the purpose of the course is to look at the big picture. How did we get into this situation of wildly disproportionate sentencing in the United States, and how it can be undone, the impediments to that, and how we can try to affect change. And then the other course I teach is law and neuroscience. Why do I teach law and neuroscience? It's because I wanted to understand what motivates people, what neuroscience and evidence can teach us about culpability and addiction and social environment. It was no longer just a question of, Gertner bleeding over this drug addict in front of her. You actually can see the difference in their brain that addiction makes. It's no longer just empathizing with people whose social background was a social background of abuse and neglect. Their brains actually look different in terms of their ability to learn, their ability to function in society. And I wanted to look at that because I wanted to talk about sentencing in a different way. It was not just empathy and compassion. It was what works and what can we actually do. So I want to give the big picture, and I hope there'll be some time for questions. The big picture is not Judge Duffy and not Judge Vasquez and not Judge Martin. The big picture is the United States Sentencing Commission still seeks to enforce guidelines. I just went on the website. The website is 99% about federal sentencing guidelines. And new judges who come into the system are taught guidelines speak. Not taught what is going on here, taught guidelines. And the Sentencing Commission wants to make sure that Congress understands how many judges are complying with the guidelines, as if the guidelines were good, as if the guidelines addressed any of the issues that are being discussed here. What you're seeing now across the country is what I've described as a sort of patchwork quilt. The guidelines are advisory, and appellate courts are largely affirming whatever district court judges do. There's some serious chaos in what appellate review of sentencing is. And so what happens is when I speak around the country, there are guideline jurisdictions. We can speak about innovation, we can speak about pretrial diversion and reentry courts, but if you're in a place that doesn't have any of that, for the most part, and you're in a guideline jurisdiction, that's it. All of the innovations that we're seeing here don't make a difference. And in addition, there's sort of a very interesting and in a sense troubling pattern. We talk about diversion on the one hand, reentry on the other. We are not changing the bedrock of sentencing. We're not using the observations from the diversion court to say, well, hell, what has worked with these offenders? For the purpose then of feeding into our actual sentencing practices. The diversion court then just what they do is sort of take off those individuals for whom we can identify success and pick them in different ways, and they have been successful. And then we, after sentencing someone to 5, 10, 15 years of a ridiculous, disproportionate sentence, we have a reentry program. But the question is whether the observations from the beginning and the end can finally get us to change the middle, to change the sentence. The courts are, even in my district, my district is District of Massachusetts. I'm Nancy Gertner, by the way. I didn't introduce myself. And the chief judge of the district says that it's really quite wonderful. We are in 80% compliance with the guideline district. What does that mean? As if it matters. It's 50% of the time the judges actually sentence according to the guidelines, and 30% of the time judges sentence according to what the government has recommended. And that counts as 80% compliance. Let's unpack that for a moment. 50% of the time you sentence within the guidelines. And that's a little bit of a ruse because it's guideline sentences and guideline departures as well. And then 30% with the government. What do the guidelines say? The guidelines say, I teach this in my law and neuroscience class, and the students are appalled. The guidelines say, addiction is not ordinarily relevant. Addiction is not ordinarily relevant. Addiction is almost relevant in every case of every drug offense. Addiction is not ordinarily relevant. It says physical circumstances is not ordinarily relevant. Mental health is not ordinarily relevant. Mental health is, in fact, critical in almost every case that I sentence. And then social and economic backgrounds, the guidelines tell us, are not ordinarily relevant. So in a world in which judges are being channeled to sentence in the guidelines in some jurisdictions, what you're seeing is fairness and justice in some parts of the country and not in others. We're at a dangerous point, and so to some degree I want to end my remarks with gloom and doom. And here's the dangerous point. The new head of the Sentencing Commission has come up with an interesting proposal, and I say that ironically. The proposal is to make the guidelines mandatory. Let me repeat that. This flawed instrument, which has been largely responsible for a dramatic mass incarceration, they want to make mandatory. How would we do it, he suggests? It would be, we would simplify the guidelines, and we'd give the jury would be given an opportunity to deal with the elements of the offense, the elements of the guidelines. So you'd say there'd be a guideline that would have 4 factors, and the jury would decide. And once the jury decides, the judge would be bound by the guidelines To be sure, the guideline ranges would be broader. Well, that's quite wonderful. But the proposal would say the judge would then make decisions within that somewhat broader range based on criminal history and offense. In other words, based on exactly the same factors that have driven mass incarceration for the past 30 years. Criminal history on the one hand, and the nature of the offense. Not mental health, not drug addiction, not economic and social circumstances. Those things are still disfavored in ordinary sentencing. And let me say one other thing. New judges come into the system, and the Sentencing Commission, for the most part, insists that they be the ones to train new judges, and the only training that new judges get, for the most part, there are exceptions, is what I like to call guideline speak. And the pressure to sentence within the guidelines also is enforced in other settings. So in my court, after I left, one judge told the lawyer, the probation writers, that he didn't want to see an elaborate pre-sentence report if there's a mandatory minimum. What that means is that the judge who sentences this person to a mandatory minimum has no sense of who the person is, because the only relevant factor for the most part is nature of the crime. Massachusetts was criticized because we spent too much money on services and evaluations. So an edict went out, a guideline went out rather, that judges were not to pay for psychiatric services, presumptively not pay for psychiatric services unless there was a pre-existing psychiatric condition. Pause. That actually has a racial impact. The kids, white middle-class kids who got in trouble in their teenage years were generally sent to the school counselor. The black kids who I sentenced from the inner cities, when they got in trouble in school, it was a disciplinary issue. So pre-existing conditions are likely not to exist pre-existing mental treatment issues are likely not to exist in the group that we were dealing with. I say all of this to suggest that there's a danger now, and we're on the precipice of a danger, particularly given changes in Washington. There are wonderfully meaningful programs that are not speaking to ordinary sentencing, and there is still this drumbeat that the most important thing about sentencing in the United States, federal sentencing, is disparity in sentencing. And if that's the most important thing, then you come up with a system where the only thing that matters is what did you do and what's your criminal record. Because there's bound to be disparity when you begin to look into the human being. There's bound to be disparity when you consider mental health and psychiatric background and addiction, and there's bound to be disparity when judges make judgments. You can have a non-disparate system when you eliminate all judgments. We're at a tipping point. I don't know what's going to happen now. There are voices that are saying tighten the system, and there are voices saying change the system. I vote for change. Thank you.